Ever been to a school committee? No, I don't go to school committee. Have you been to a town council meeting? I don't go to town council meeting. Have you ever been to the state house? No, where is it? Folks, our country only works because you make it work. You're responsible. Citizenship requires participation. You sit home and watch television. Don't have time to even watch the news. I'm tired of the news, it's always negative. Well, call the TV station and say, I would like some positive news. If you look at the TV station and you see only white people on the TV, write a letter to the station and say, I would like to see people of color. I like to see some diversification. It's your responsibility as Americans. We're a melting pot with a whole bunch of lumps. We gotta undo those lumps. All right, I'm gonna stop you. I know I got up till 1 o'clock. What questions do you have on anything I said? Yes.
I have two questions. One is about what do you think would happen, or would Dr. King do if he's alive now?
I think Dr. King was switching into, one of the marches that I went with him was Poor People's March. And he thinks it's nice to get people registered to vote. It's nice people to get job training. It's nice to get, but if you don't participate, where you can grow in a society and take a piece of society. Like there was a program called the WPA that was done in 1930, I think it was done under President Roosevelt. And President Roosevelt, and I think it was Work Progressive Organization, Association. Administration, thank you. The WPA made almost 4 million Americans had the right to work. It's unemployed people. My grandmother used to have to walk 5 miles to and from work, sewing clothes and making clothes. This country needs to make sure people work. People are unemployed. If you don't give me a job, I'm going to be a criminal. My family's going to eat, legally or illegally. And excuse me, law enforcement people in the room. But it's true. If you don't feed people, they're not going to stop. And so Dr. King would be about the economics of America, where 1% of this country controls 90% of the wealth of this country. There's something wrong with that. And it's only going to change if you make it change. If you get involved, you let your governor know what you feel like, you know who your senator is. You got to know who all these elected people are. Because if you ran for Congress, 1 term, 2 years, you get your whole pension the rest of your life. You wear that? Should be more people running for Congress. I like to have a pension like that. You got health coverage when no one else has health coverage. So folks, politics, Dr. King would be into politics. Dr. King would be sleeping in Washington, D.C. He'd be sleeping in the White House. He'd be ready to go to jail. He died for what he believed in, folks. 38 years old. 38 years old. Any other questions?
Yes, I have another question. Just one more. One more. I'm sorry. Just one more, but I don't want to change the subject too much. But I'm asking about, okay, so similar things to what happened in Selma and in the civil rights movement in the 60s are happening now in the Middle East and in other countries. And for example, I'll give you an example, like in Syria, there's like thousands and thousands, probably 1 million people that were killed fighting for similar thing that the civil rights people here were fighting for. In Egypt, in one day, 4,000 people were killed fighting for the same thing. And it's what do you think about this happened under the nose of the first African American United States president and let it happen?
Well, yeah, every president is only as good as his elected officials allow him to be. The president of the United States is now talking about building a wall. And I don't think Congress is going to allow that to happen. And I think that there are 16 states that are now suing against having that wall done. You know, we have 3 forms of government. And this government President Obama didn't do as much as, because there were black people saying he didn't do nothing about reparations. Now, I can prove I can name the ancestors, black slave person in my family by name. Now, some of you folks are yelling reparation, you can't even prove that you're a slave or a descendant of a slave. So you can't do that unless you can say, my Aunt Susie, but what name and who she was and where she lived. People need to know who their records are, but getting back to you, until America starts doing for Americans and are realistic about that, they're not gonna have a better attitude towards the world. We're not an isolationist country. But right now, it appears that we're an isolationist country. And I can't wait to vote in 2020. Yes.
There was more to add to what you said. You said not only black people should be fighting for racism, is the fact that like we have many places, like if we could remember, Bank of America just got sued because they wasn't allowing people of color to get just entry level. Like I have a degree in economics, it's almost like hard to get there because you know it's not only what you could bring to the table, but you always based on your color. Like when I went to Bridgewater State, not only am I black, but I'm Cape Verdean. They only know of us here in Brockton. And every day I'm like, when people talking to me, it's like, are they just looking at this black girl that they think she doesn't have a degree? So I'm always like question myself, do I have to prove? And when I'm teaching my son, that's only 7, I'm also teaching him, like you get scared because are you telling him not to like people because of their color, or do you tell them the whole truth? And then do you feel sad and tell him what is America? And then when you think of America, when I was back home, when I think of America, I thought of this place where you have this chance, where the American dream exists. Then you come here, the American dream is not for everybody. It's not you control your dream, but other people control your dream. It's like a sad, like where you say, don't only get the entry position, but you're a limit to that entry position. There's a wall there that tells you, no matter what you get, you're still gonna only get the entry position.
That's only if you accept that. See, the issue is, if you open one door and it's not there, but you sometimes can't do it by yourself. See, I belong to the NAACP, I belong to CORE, I belong to SNCC, and I belong to religious groups. So sometimes I get the League of Women Voters. When we were collecting food and clothing to take to the South, I had to get hundreds of people to help. So sometimes you may need to look at joining your religious group and trying to get them more active. Because many religious groups have brought change in this country. I was at the State House and the Right to Life had at least 1,000 people up there yesterday. I had trouble parking. So people are getting out and being motivated. And the women's movement is doing something. There are women's groups that are doing, because in the early days, don't forget, 1776 gave the vote to white men who were property owners. White women didn't get the right to vote till 1920. Native Americans got the right to vote 1924. And black people didn't get the right to vote till 1965. So we're moving with all deliberate speed. Yes.
Can you go into how civil rights impacts healthcare?
All right. Civil rights and fair housing do that a lot. Because if you look where people who live around the dump, the landfills we call them now, you don't know what's buried in any piece of land. It's usually the low-income community that lives in areas that are very hazardous to their health. They don't know what's in the ground, and people many times were dumping in the poverty community hazardous material. It costs a lot of money to get rid of hazardous waste, so they would dump it in that community. I think healthcare is also the replacement of many religions. many people have given up their structured religion and don't participate. And so the attracting place is healthcare. When you sit down and figure, this is like one of the top employers in Rockland.
Mhm.
How many employers are bigger than this? I don't know what you have for employees, but I would imagine, when I look at all these buildings here, this is like a main artery of the body.
Mm.
And so I think that healthcare is critical to low income. But unfortunately, it has not made it available. So some people on healthcare stay on welfare because they can't take an entry-level job that gives them no health coverage, so they stay on welfare. And so healthcare is critical, folks. And that's why I think it's important that this country provide healthcare for everybody. I think it's a critical need, like breathing. You know, how do you function? So you get stressed because you're black. Well, I think racism has a lot to do with health issues of people of color. Here's a woman with a college degree, going to go get a job, and then takes her frustration out on, I don't know, her boyfriend, husband, kids, car, dog, somebody gets that frustration out. So healthcare has a direct relationship to the survival of people. And I think that the healthcare industry needs to start with, one, where are you employing the people of color? That's number one. And what program do you have to have upward mobility of those people of color? I went down south in 1968 to recruit black teachers. I brought 14 black teachers, and folks, I integrated a hotel with a white man in 1968 in Tallahassee, Florida, the year they had linked 7 people. I brought back 14 people, had to find them houses, had to find them furniture. It lasted 2 years in Rhode Island. 2 years. They all went back down south. They found it more realistic to face the southern culture where racism was a lion than the snake in the grass in Rhode Island. So, one, we as a country need to deal with racism. And health care, as I said, is like many say, it takes a village to raise people. Well, it takes health care to raise people. You can't function without health care. You can't function. You know, and I wish that somebody would do something about prescription drugs. And you sit down and figure, friends of mine are buying their expensive drugs not in USA. Not in the USA. They can buy them for 25% of the cost in this country. And no one's regulating what pharmaceutical companies are charging. Someone needs to be beating up legislators. Someone needs to be writing letters. You know, it isn't sick people, it's people with college degrees. People who have high education. All right, excuse me, let me stop. I get wound up, I can go for 2 hours.
We talked about this before, but one of the statistics that's really interesting to me is that African Americans for the past 60 years or so are 75% more likely to die during infancy than white Americans are. And it was not until Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that changed all of that. And between 1965 and 75, they say 7,000 additional black infants survived infancy, and at least 25,000 infants from 1965 to 2000. And that generated over $7 billion, in saved revenue for this country just by the Civil Rights Act desegregating hospitals to allow for better health care for infants and mothers.
Well, it's unfortunate people in this country don't want to do right unless they get abused. They have to be demonstrated again. It's not a voluntary thing. Folks, it took a lot of sleep-ins and sit-ins to get the 64 Voting Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 64 was no accident. And folks, all these things were protected by the Constitution. And when did it take to get women to be able to participate in sports? The Civil Rights Act. You know, we did it for black people. We did fair housing for black people. But what we've done is improve America and made opportunity not only for poor blacks, but poor whites. And all women have been brought to the table. Because folks, when black people couldn't vote, they still lobbied in support of the women's right to vote who are white in this country. I want to deal with somebody else. Have you heard of Dr. Charles Drew? Dr. Charles Drew developed blood plasma, a black man. And guess what happened to Dr. Charles Drew? He was the head of the first Red Cross blood drive. Okay? And he organized blood banks in the military, and he was a great human being. The Red Cross said we have to segregate the blood from black people and the blood from white people, and Dr. Drew quit. Dr. Drew was going to a conference in North Carolina, on his way to Alabama, I believe it was, and April 1st, 1950. And he had a car accident. There were 3 or 4 people in the car. And he needed a blood transfusion. The man who was the father of the blood bank went to a white hospital that rejected him, and he died on his way to a black hospital. So when we're talking about change in this country, it don't happen by accident, folks. And people are not going to do good unless you make them do good. And I'm here to say that it's your responsibility to get involved. Get involved in something. Because hard times are coming, folks. The next election, if certain people get elected, because I remember what happened in Charlottesville. I remember that the Klan was not a bad organization. I remembered that people who want to burn crosses and scare people and kill people. I remember, in fact, folks, you should go to, I believe it's 3,400 people that were lynched in America. There's a museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And the other thing, if you don't belong to any organization, you should belong to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is located in Alabama. It was started by Julian Bond. Julian and I started out together. A great human being passed away several years ago. And the Southern Poverty Law Center monitors radical hate groups in America. And the incidents of hate are increasing in this country, not decreasing. Let me stop. I know I got, 7 minutes? All right, folks, got 7 minutes, I'm gonna go out the door.
So I think, I lived in Alabama in the 70s and early 80s, and I think for me, the biggest benefit of the civil rights legislation is that there's been an increased awareness on the part of folks that are not of color about all of the injustices that have happened for, so long in our country. And I was touched when you were mentioning the story about the little girls in the Sunday school, because I was about 10 when that happened. I was close to their age, and I was reading it in a magazine, and I couldn't believe in the United States of America that 4 little girls could be bombed to death going to Sunday school, and it was okay that something like that would happen. So I think, when I was living in Alabama, it wasn't, in my view, wasn't long enough after the gains that we had from civil rights to actually see a lot of dramatic change. But since then, even things like in Massachusetts with MCAS scores, the high schools in Alabama when I lived there were so bad for kids that were from impoverished homes that they really were not qualified to go to to go to college, even if they graduated, because the curriculum and the lack of resources and the lack of qualified teachers was just horrific.
Well, on that issue, folks, you all heard what you're saying. on that issue, the NAACP, I'm not the spokesman for them today. I used to be the spokesman, I'm not, but I'm sharing. They are opposed to charter schools. Charter schools take the money out of public education, and folks, when Brown versus Board of Education, all the charter schools, white schools in the South, all white people went to, they didn't integrate, they started up with charter schools. And where does that money come from? The general fund. So I'm opposed to charter schools today. And charter schools are not a solution. We need to put more money into public education. Public education is underfunded. When you sit down and figure, what was pharmaceutical companies got, what, $200 billion from this country? And
It's just one pharmaceutical.
and I'm saying, when you sit down and figure, and we're not preparing, and why aren't our kids prepared? If I don't eat and have a good meal, and I gotta worry about rats in my house, roaches in my house, how am I gonna function in school? I didn't get a meal last night. I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Because when you sit down and figure, we haven't even talked about the cost of rent. How does the poor people find a house, pay rent, pay gasoline, all the utilities, and then go to the market because poor people are not getting a discount on anything. In fact, it costs them more. What is there, 18 million people in this country that can't qualify for a credit card? And can't go to the bank? Have to go to these rob 'em, hold you up, check cashing places? They charge, what, 300% interest? And no one's doing anything about that one? But I gotta go back to Dr. Charles Drew. And, anyone heard about, Dr. Lewis Hayden? Lewis Hayden was a slave born in 1801. And I'm gonna make it quick because my time is running. And he, got married. And Henry Clay sold his wife and son that he never saw again. He remarried and escaped and had to buy his own freedom to get to Boston, Massachusetts. You need to read up on him. Lewis Hayden. And his wife was Harriet Hayden. And when she died, his slave folks, they left $5,000 to Harvard University for African American medical students. Now, I don't know how much money Harvard has spent on that program. And I don't know how many people got a scholarship on that program. But just think, the entire estate, $5,000, was given to Harvard for medical students to show how important healthcare is to the black community. Now, my grandmother was a family doctor. And if my grandmother couldn't solve it, we had to go to the religious leader. And if that didn't happen, we went to the family doctor. Because family doctors don't cost us money. In the South, they used to pay them with chicken. In the North, they pay them with money. And my family doctor was a black man. And he would make house calls. Found out I needed my tonsils removed. But he couldn't go to the hospital because he wasn't accepted at Rhode Island Hospital. I needed a hospital in Rhode Island. And unfortunately, we have to change things, folks. And it's your responsibility, not mine. I've done most of what I've got to do, and now I want to help see Florida. I want to have more vacations. Folks, my father died at 58 years old. My younger sister died at 53. My younger sister got committed to something we haven't talked about. She was a legal junkie. She died she was taking 12 Percodan a day, 53 years old. There wasn't a problem in America until it moved to suburbia. And now we're concerned about people having addictions. But we're only superficially touching that. We're finding a shot to retrieve them, but we're not dealing with the root causes, which may be lack of a job, maybe lack of a house, maybe lack of an education. You know, why would the greatest country in the world make people indebted? Our daughter is a lawyer, and she's going to be paying the rest of her life. She said her student loan is the cost of her mortgage. Now, how can people live like that? How can they live like this? And we're going to do what? Build a wall.